Hey folks, happy Friday. It's rainy and dreary in the deep south, but it is Friday, so that's always good. I just want to give you an update on my attempts to talk with conservatives here. If you'll remember, if you've checked out any of the other stuff I've done, this podcast is a result of commentary on local conservative talk shows. Um, One of them is actually owned by the mayor of Valdosta. It's 92 Talk Radio 92.1. The mayor has had a conservative talk radio show for about 17 years. And then there's Black Crow Media, which is a different company. They have WVGA 105.9, I think, and they recently pulled a show that they had called The Morning Drive with Steve Nichols. Um, uh, a number of things have been said on both those shows that really disturbed me. And so for the past 6 weeks, I've been trying to talk with the host of them as well as the guest host of the Morning Drive that Steve had on when he was gone. Um, so I've contacted the mayor 6 times now. I've contacted Steve about 4 times and nobody will talk with me. I'm hoping I might get a chance to talk with Steve next week about some things. But the mayor has kind of been dodging me in many ways. And I actually called in on his live show and invited him on the podcast. He agreed to do that, but since has not fallen through. So I explained to both of them that all I want to do is have a conversation about whether or not one-sided conservative talk radio, or liberal for that matter, but in our community, it's conservative, that broadcast people like Glenn Beck and Rush Limbaugh and all the usual suspects, Lars Larson and Ben Shapiro. Um, Whether or not that's good for our country, good for our community. And I'd also like to talk about whether it's Christian. Uh, Both Scott, Steve, and I, or all three of us, claim to be Christian. And so those are the two things I wanted to talk with them about. In addition to some content on their shows. I'm disappointed that neither of them have been willing to talk with me. Um, I've even reached out with the mayor to the city council because the mayor has a morning show where he blurs the line between being a private political pundit and the mayor of Valdosta, Georgia. He spends a lot of time talking about what he does every day as mayor. He refers to himself as the mayor. Um, and he kind of debriefs what he did the day before as the mayor. But then he starts giving his political opinion about things. And oftentimes it's inflammatory, oftentimes it's partisan, oftentimes it's inaccurate, oftentimes it's insulting. I have some problems with that blurb. So I reached out to the city council and made them aware of a few things that he has said. I'm not sure they're concerned about this. They have other things to do. But this video is an effort to kind of demonstrate some of the things that I and others are concerned about. I'm incredibly sad that both Scott and Steve, as well as the guest host that Steve have had on, all have a lot to say on air, but they're unwilling to have a conversation. I find it sad and also very interesting. And my invitation to both of them, and anybody for that matter that's conservative or liberal or radical, I like talking to everybody. So my invitation to them, even though they've declined it multiple times, stands. Um, so what I wanted to do today is simply kind of show you some of the things that our mayor um, has said that I think need to be discussed. I think the other thing I would mention before I show you that is both Scott and Steve argue that the 74 million people who voted for Donald Trump are rightfully angry. And I would agree with them. And there's millions of white, angry people full of rage. And I'm not one of them. I'm a white person too. I've been angry at times in my life, but I don't have this rage that I sense from them. Um, what I don't hear either of them reflect on or contemplate is, are people angry because they've been kind of dining on and have been fed for 2 to 3 decades through conservative radio outlets that don't offer counterpoints, don't offer room for dialogue, don't correct inaccuracies, have constantly told white America that you're losing your country, that the Muslims are going to get it, the Muslim president's going to get it, who's not really a citizen, The feminists are going to get it. They're tearing the family apart. The immigrants are getting it. I mean, the message for almost 3 decades now on most of those outlets, again, that don't include any other viewpoint, don't include debate or discussion in any meaningful sense, have been telling white America that you're being victimized. And pointing out who is victimizing you. So the Democrats who are really socialist and really communist and the feminazis and all that, those are your problem. They're not really Americans. They're not really patriots. They really hate your country. So I find it interesting that now conservative talk show hosts want to justify anger among white America, but don't maybe recognize the role that talk radio, particularly conservative talk radio, has played in making people angry and feeling like they're victimized. So that's another kind of area that I'd like to talk with them about. For those of you who don't know, in addition to doing this, I coordinate a racial justice organization called the Mary Turner Project. And as you'll see, not necessarily in this video, but in others, there's racial overtones to all this kind of stuff. And we as an organization, given the mayor's reluctance to talk with us, are going to file a formal complaint. We've contacted the city about that, talked to the city manager, who isn't sure if there is a process to do that. So we're waiting to hear back from him before we move ahead. I think the other thing I would say about all of this is the members of the Mary Turner Project, if we can't ever get to a place where we talk about this, what we will do is be reaching out to the sponsors of these stations. That is not meant to be threatening or intimidating, or we don't want to impact anybody's income and livelihood, especially in this kind of economic moment that we're living in. At the same time, I and others do not want to spend my hard-earned money at places that think I'm un-American, at places that support this kind of divisive radio content on both of these stations. So we will be organizing. Currently, we're putting together databases of sponsors, and we'll be reaching out to those businesses to see if the values and the commentary that is hurled on these stations 7 days a week reflect their values. And if that is the case, we will be encouraging people that find that offensive and divisive and unhealthy for our communities not to spend money at those places. So hopefully we won't get to that moment in that place. Hopefully we'll get to have some conversations and find some middle ground in this. But we are talking about that because that's a real possibility. With all that said, just bear with me because I'm still grappling at chest cold. Please share this video with whoever. Please send it to the mayor. Please send it to the city council. Please share it with your social networks. I plan to send it to the city, the mayor and the city council. Again, just to give them an idea of why many of us are upset and why many of us think there needs to be a conversation. And I also see this as an opportunity. Valdosta wants to be special. Let's be special. Let's model to the rest of the country how we heal the divide that is tearing us apart as a nation. We can do that. We can do that, but we have to talk with one another to even begin to figure out how to do that. So as grim as all this seems, it's also an opportunity. And I would argue it's up to us whether we rise to the occasion or not. So with that said, let me show you some of the things that the mayor of Valdosta has said that we find disturbing. Let me do this. And just for the record, my understanding, according to my legal advisors, is that it's okay to use people's content if you're making commentary or criticism on it. So just wanted to show you this fair use notice. The first thing I want to show you is that for weeks now, let me stop this for just a second. The mayor has been advocating for Joe Biden to pardon Donald Trump. And not once in the days I've tuned in has the mayor of Valdosta made any reference to the attack on the Capitol. He has not made any reference to the 5 people who died, including a law officer, excuse me. What he is instead emphasizes that the Democrats, and I'm not a Democrat, but need to actually pardon Donald Trump from his first impeachment. This has all been said before the second one, in order to bring the country together. Now, what concerns me about that, and I've asked the mayor this, is he suggesting that we ignore the crimes that were committed on January the 6th? And I think that's a fair question to the mayor, since the mayor influences how law enforcement works in my community. And to date, he has refused to comment on it. So I just wanted to play you a little bit of what he's had to say about kind of the political state of affairs.
The man's out in a matter of what? 8 days? Am I correct? Yes. Packing his bag, and now every speech sounds just like that, concession, and it'll be a peaceful transition, and take him in his words. But to do the dog and pony show that they're going to try to do today, and I think you know, and if you catch some of the talking heads, Pelosi and the rest of them, they're in a big hurry to do it. I think that's a massive mistake, and that's me inside myself saying it. That's me stepping outside myself and saying it wrong, and wrong again on about 50 fronts. If you can't see that, then you're not that big person that can. And then another bunch of preachers condemning it. I expect forgiveness from them first and foremost. So let's go. Let's move on. Put the blinders on. Look forward. Look forward to what you think the country will look like, and you're not whatever they're about to do. I don't get it.
So this was said before the second impeachment was finalized. And there's a number of things we need to unpack. And just for the record, the mayor has the right to say whatever the hell he wants. Nobody's trying to squelch his free speech. Again, though, as an elected official that's supposed to be nonpartisan, on his show constantly, he slams anybody that's not a conservative. He generally picks on the Democrats, and I'll show you examples of that in just a little bit, but he has the right to say whatever he wants to say. I think one of the reasons I bring this example up is it's been interesting to watch conservatives say that there has been a peaceful transfer of power since Donald Trump, after the attack, kind of changed his tone and got in line with the fact that he wasn't going to be the president this coming year, this coming 4 years. That wasn't the case up until the attack on the Capitol. So this is a great example of how the mayor doesn't talk about that there were crimes committed. He does not say whether people should be prosecuted. He doesn't say anything about the deaths that occurred, the death threats that were made towards Mike Pence, a conservative Republican vice president. But instead, he tells us to put our heads down, put your blinders on, and move forward. So what we've asked the mayor is, are you suggesting that we ignore those crimes? We've asked him that. I've asked him that 3 times. He hasn't responded yet. I've also requested, given this kind of commentary of his, like, what is his position then, particularly as the mayor of a place, and he has impacts on how policing is done? Like, well, what is he thinking? So I've asked him to issue a formal statement about it, and he's refused to do that up until now. He has backpedaled a little on this in the last few days, but I just find it interesting that he focused on pardoning the president and omitted the fact that major crimes were committed, and it doesn't seem like he wants those people held accountable. So the next piece, one of the things that's happened since Georgia went to Biden, and we had the state runoff election where millions and millions of dollars were pumped into the state, we had historic turnouts. Both sides mobilized, but the Democrats, and I'm not a Democrat, worked their butts off. I've never seen anything like it in my life. So people were out canvassing, getting people registered. And ever since then, and let's just be very, very clear about something. We have a Republican governor, a Republican secretary of state, and the guy that heads up the elections at the state level, I believe, is a Republican as well. We've had Republican attorney generals throughout the country say there was not systematic voter fraud. So I'm a little weary hearing from conservatives that things were stolen when in fact their side says, no, it wasn't. And now they're dismissing those people as part of the establishment versus people that are telling the truth. But in light of the big Democratic turnout, and let me just tell you, Valdosta is a predominantly Black city. It's also a predominantly Democratic city. And again, just watching people mobilize in our community was inspiring. I'm not a big person, I'm not a big electoral politics kind of guy, but people really took it seriously. You know, I heard stories of canvassers, and one of them's on a podcast I did with DJ Davis, where he talked about, you know, talking to a woman that was 64 and she voted for the first time. So it was moving to see what was going on here. And what I think is happening for conservatives is they woke up and realized some things, and it's not a new problem. They realize that the country is getting brown. Our states are getting brown. There are more people of color than white folks in a couple of decades. White people no longer be the numerical majority. I think it's 2 to 3 decades. And folks are scrambling to figure out ways to hold on to political power. We're almost going through what Reverend Barber called a kind of new reconstruction. So this is about political power and who's going to wield it. And I think that's what it meant to take your country back to, among many people I've talked with. So that's going on. And given that reality, we're in a Black city, we got a white mayor representing Black folks here who make up just under 55% of the population, maybe closer to 60, I can't remember. But I just want to play a little bit what he had to say about the Democrats' voting and mobilization efforts. And again, I'm not a Democrat, but I found this troubling.
On one day, it's illegal to pay somebody to vote. But on the next day, being election day, it's legal to pay somebody to canvass. Even though they don't canvass, even though they don't go to a house, they hop on a bus, they go down, they vote, they come back, and they cash a $75 check. So the day before, it's illegal. The next day, completely legal, or at least enough gray area.
I think a lot of what that is they pay somebody $75 to go find 5 friends to take to the poll. Hey, here's $75. I want you to go over there. And
as long as you bring 5 friends, they get a $75 check as well, Jack. You're exactly right. So gray that they don't even go after it to prosecute. Not this ethics guy I just talked about. I handed over the 65 $75 checks, banned out on the table, cashed at the same liquor store, deposited at the same thing. I don't know what else to say. Mm-hmm.
So, like with the other clip, there's a lot to unpack. The mayor of our predominantly Black city is suggesting votes were purchased. He is saying people did not actually canvass. They got paid to take people to the polls. And evidently they were recruited at a liquor store because that's the same place that they cashed their $75 check. I've asked the mayor for evidence to back up these inflammatory claims. Again, I know a lot of the people that were canvassing. I think it's insulting. I think it has all kinds of overtones, references to liquor stores. And I think it's a good example of how many conservatives are only Democratic if they win. Because if they lose, something must have went wrong. So the other deep part of this for me that angers me is that he's suggesting people committed crimes. He even says, this is such a gray area, they don't even prosecute it. So he's saying that about more than half of the folks, well, if half are Democrats in our community. And they're saying that when people were actually activated as voters. So that's one of my big problems with it, but it gets worse. So let me play the rest of it for you.
Yeah, well, it was illegal yesterday, but today's election day, so it's called canvassing. And they can pay. They brought 5 friends. They hopped on a bus.
It's like ballot harvesting. On the right, we say, well, that can't be fair because it's you don't know where those ballots came from, but on the left, it's like, oh, well, what's wrong with it? As long as people get the vote, we need to get these votes in. Getting these votes in is important. And I'm like, no, it's not.
And if you oppose it, Jack, you suppress it.
I don't care. I am suppressing those votes because they're not. I am blatantly coming out right now saying I think we should suppress the vote. I think suppressing the vote needs to be done because a lot of people who aren't allowed to vote are voting because we're making it too easy.
Jack has long thought that you should have to test
I
the
think,
front door.
voting should be hard. I don't think it should be this easy. And I don't care if you think anything negative about me because I'm an old man and I'm going to die in the near future. So it doesn't matter what you think of me.
So, again, a lot to unpack with this little comment. Accusations of voter fraud that there's no evidence for, and we've asked the mayor for evidence to the effect that people were committing voter fraud. And then the mayor, in a state where it has a long history of suppressing Black voters, and his sidekick, co-host Jack, kind of start joking about the idea of having tests at polls. Jack goes on to say that people are voting that aren't supposed to be voting. Again, we've asked him for evidence to back up that claim. We haven't seen anything and haven't gotten a response. So to have, that suggestion put out in the air and the mayor kind of chuckle about it in a state that had a long history of suppressing Black people in terms of them getting to exercise their civil right of voting through the use of poll taxes and literacy tests is just really troubling. Like, I honestly don't know what to say about it other than having somebody boldly say, let's suppress the vote, right? Because he believes without any evidence, even when the Republican Secretary of State said there was no massive voter fraud, is deeply troubling. It's something we need to talk about. There's just a couple of other things I wanted to show you that's kind of connected to this. So let's go. I'm going to skip this next one.
Yeah. By the way, I have a political comment for the day. Okay. If you want to go to a Trump rally or go shopping or go out to eat or go to a ball game, you can't because you could spread the virus. But we'll welcome in tens of thousands of migrants in one big group, unchecked from disease-ridden nations. Is this correct?
Colonel, I'm gonna give you the two hot spots, and they actually call it the hot spots of the globe. It's Arizona and California.
Gee, I wonder why that is.
Well, I'm gonna ask, what do they have in common? Large, massive, unchecked migrant populations.
Oh yeah, well, we have a lady.
So let me stop it there because the colonel goes into an anecdote about somebody he knows. So now the mayor in a city with a large migrant population, people who work hard, people who pick the food we eat, is agreeing with a caller who is saying that COVID spikes in California and Arizona are the result of rampant illegal immigration from disease-ridden countries. Our mayor agrees with him, kind of, again, reinforces the belief. We've asked for data. They don't offer any in this kind of claim. There's no evidence. There's no research. And it's troubling on a lot of levels. Number one, it must mean that if they believe this, they don't believe President Trump's wall works that well. I find it funny that the guy claims that you can't go to Trump rallies when we just had a Trump rally in Valdosta, Georgia. Some estimates are 25,000 people are there. Not long after that, we had a spike in COVID cases as well. So to have somebody say we can't have a Trump rally when in fact we had one in Valdosta, Georgia, leading up to the Senate runoff, I guess the colonel just forgot. But when you live in a place where there's tons of migrant workers, and the mayor of that place suggests that they are infecting people, or at least they are in other places, to many of us, that is concerning because it might shape the perception and the treatment those people get from our mayor's listeners. So we thought it was problematic. Again, we've asked the mayor to produce evidence to back up that claim, and he's ignored our request, just like all the other ones. Just want to show you one more thing that the mayor said that's a little troubling. He again agrees with this, the colonel, who's a regular caller in on the show almost every day. The colonel claims, let me see if I can find it. This.
And based on my work in the intelligence community for 14 years, including the national level, and my training in biochemical warfare, because I was a battalion biochemical warfare officer, this thing was engineered. This was not natural.
Agreed. Agreed.
All right, that's enough. So the colonel, who is a veteran, who was trained in biochemical warfare, which means you can fight when biological or chemical agents are used in combat. He is not a chemist, as far as I know. He's not a virologist, as far as I know. Makes a claim that this was basically a biological weapon engineered by the Chinese. Our mayor, who is not a chemist, a virologist, agrees with him. Again, I find it interesting that conservative talk show hosts, and many liberal ones too, have an opinion about everything. They have an opinion about everything that is often utterly uninformed, and typically they don't produce evidence to back up the claims. Generally what happens on these shows is that, just like on liberal shows, is that conservative folks go through conservative news outlets and pick out the stories that they kind of want to propagate on their radio show for that day, and that's what happens. So these are just a few examples of what we find troubling and divisive that's coming from the mayor of our community. No mention of the attack on the Capitol, the seat of our democracy, and the crimes that were committed there, but we should pardon the president, who many feel incited it. I don't necessarily agree that he incited it. I don't think the language was legally there. What he did fail to do was respond to it. So he let it happen until Mike Pence mobilized the National Guard, as far as what I've been told. We have a mayor and his co-host that accused the Democrats of basically purchasing votes from people who just went and cashed their $75 check and didn't get investigated at the local liquor store. We have a mayor in a community with we're in a predominantly Black city. We have a mayor in a community with a large migrant population that does all the kind of agricultural work here, suggesting that migrant workers are the cause of COVID spikes, again, without any data. And then he goes on to claim that the Chinese engineered COVID-19 as a biological weapon. And he won't talk about any of this. With that said, please share this. Mr. Mayor, if you happen to see this, please talk to me. Let's have a conversation. Let's stop tearing our communities apart. I know it's profitable. It's profitable on the left and on the right to be divisive, to be one-sided. But if anything is going to bring us together, this is not going to do it. What's going to do it is us deciding, look, we've got to talk with one another. We have to find out where we share commonalities. And if you'll ever take the time to talk with me, I actually agree with you about a number of things. It'll probably shock you. But we as a community, we have an opportunity, instead of just being remembered for football and those things are great, but why don't we model to the rest of the country how to heal? Why don't we model to the rest of the country how to reconcile and respect each other's perspectives and differences? Why don't we model to the country that those things don't necessarily have to be bad, and they don't necessarily mean somebody doesn't love their country? So that's up to us. But my invitation to you and to Steve stands, and anybody else that wants to talk with me about any of this stuff. I hope you will take advantage of that. And I just hope you'd keep your word, that you would come on the podcast and have a conversation with me. With that said, peace and love to everybody out there. I hope you have a good weekend, and thanks for checking this out. And please share it with those you know if you think it's important. Take care.